Hey, Wes here. Thanks for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And today I have kind of a nerdy kind of experiment to do. So just stick with me for this for a little bit. In the desert Southwest, in the ancient desert Southwest, there was some pots that were painted and decorated with a glazed paint. They didn't glaze the whole pot. There's no evidence of that, but making decorations with a glazed paint is something that was done. Pinedale would be an example of that. And there's been a lot of people who've tried to figure out how they did that. And I've had some experiments, and I'll put some links down below in the description about those experiments. Andy Ward has done some, and various archaeologists have done studies about that as well. But to my knowledge, no one has totally figured out on a reliable basis, and there was a lot of pottery made like this. So one of my friends and viewers has suggested that maybe it was actually an organic paint as opposed to a mineral-based paint. All the other experiments that I've seen have been basically lead-based, usually would have some kind of a copper ore in it, like copper carbonate, and manganese, and different kinds of minerals, and fluxes, but mostly lead. But this organic paint is frequently beeweed. It can be other kinds of things as well. So his idea is that the pot was made, it was slipped in white, sometimes it could be red, it was actually fired plain. Once it was fired, it was painted with organic paint and refired to a really low level, just basically getting that organic paint to melt and turn into a glaze. So that's what I'm going to do today, is to test whether an organic paint can be a glaze. And so let's get started. Here is what I have to work with. I have made some test tiles. These are already fired, and that was the idea, that the pots were made and slipped and fired and then painted and refired at a low temperature. So I've used a couple of different slips. This is a basic white paint, clay-based. This is also clay-based. It is a kind of a buff color, I guess, but it's smectite. Smectite clay is used normally in times when we use organic paint. And then here's the organic paint. This is beeweed. Beeweed basically is just a plant, and you put it in water, or you boil it down and turn it into a syrup, and that makes a paint. And I will try to remember to put a link in the description about how to make beeweed if that interests you. So I will put some paint on these different tiles. I'm going to fire them at different temperatures in my little electric kiln and see what happens. The test tiles have been painted, so I will fire these at 200 Celsius, 400, 600, and 750 Celsius, two different slips. These are control tiles. These are tiles that have not been fired yet, so it's just green clay basically. And so I'll fire those at 750, which is a common number for organic paint. Again, the test, though, is to see if we end up with glaze on any of these. I've set the kiln for 200 degrees, got the two tiles set in here. It'll take just probably maybe 15 minutes at most to get up to 200 degrees. Then I'm going to let it soak for 15 minutes and then take them out. Well, let's see what this looks like. It's cooled for a while. It still should be fairly hot. All right, we'll look at all of the rest of them too, but it's nice black paint, and I can't tell, it doesn't seem to have a lot of shine to it. And we'll look at the other one. It came out a little bit different, but now we'll do the next one at 400 degrees and so on. All right, let's see what the 400 degree Celsius ones look like. Hey, well, this is interesting. So we might need to rub those off. That might just be ash over the top of that. So that's the one with the smectite. This is the one with regular clay. It's clear that the organic paint just doesn't want to stick to that kind of clay. Let's look at the tiles that were fired at 750 degrees. Okay, well, first of all, this is a tile with just plain white clay that was previously fired, so all of the organic paint burned off of that. Here is the other tile. This is Smectite clay, and most of the paint burned off on that as well. So with the control ones, this is Smectite clay, and it was unfired. It's an unfired tile, and that I would expect it to be black, but it's there anyway. And if we look at the plain white clay, not Smectite, there's nothing. It's gone. So you can, one thing this does show is that Smectite clay will absorb organic paint. Regular clay, generally not. All right, I'm pivoting the experiment a little bit. We're going to do, I've got the kiln preheated to 315 Celsius. I'm going to put the tiles in briefly and see how that works. So here's one tile. Put that in. And the other one. And shut the door. Okay, it's been 5 minutes. Let's see what we end up with here. It's turned black. The question is it glazy? I don't think so. Okay, I'm not seeing any glaziness on this. This is the tile with the Smectite clay. I'm going to put it back in for a few more minutes. See what happens. Okay, it has gone for a couple more minutes. Let's see what we get. You know, the paint. Oops, that doesn't work. The paint definitely turns black. I'm not seeing very much glazing to it. With this tile, I can see that it does look a little bit glazy-like and very black. This is just a plain clay white slipped tile. Okay, I'm going to do another experiment. This is what I would expect glaze to work like. This is a mixture of a lead ore, which is galena. It has manganese in it and copper carbonate, and then some clay as a binder and fixative. And I'm going to heat this up to 850 Celsius to see what happens with that. Now let me show you what I came up with. I opened the kiln, and look at that. The tile just burst apart. I'm not exactly sure. It must have had some water in it. Doesn't make that much difference. Here is a good sample, though, with the lead paint. And right there you can see that it glazed pretty well. It's still pretty warm in there. Did this glaze? And you can see it glazed pretty well. Here's another piece. Try to get it in focus. So that glazed pretty well too. So this is telling me that the lead in the paint mixture is probably the thing that was really responsible for glazing, at least from my perspective. Let's summarize what we have here. These 6 tiles all were pre-fired, and then organic paint was put on them to see if organic paint would create a glaze. Well, I really don't see that. I see it a little bit on this one. It's a little bit shiny. Not a whole lot. What I do find is that the organic paint can get pretty black, and it actually sticks better to Smectite kinds of slips than just a regular clay slip. And it's interesting, it burned off pretty quickly, which I don't understand for sure. Although I think that these just stayed in the kiln too long. And the longer it's in there, the more that carbon from the organic paint burns off. But the big question here is, does organic paint create a glaze? And I'm not seeing that. But we do know that organic paint sticks better to smectite clay. Here's another example with these two here. Preheated the kiln to 315 degrees. These went in for 7 minutes. So I get good solid blacks. I tried to wash it off. That would not wash off. But again, I'm not seeing glaze here. It's a pretty flat. So I think it would be possible to paint a pot after it was fired. Again, these tiles were pre-fired. You could paint a pot after it was fired and heat it up a little bit and get good solid blacks. We know here that with the organic paint, it burns off over time. It's basically carbon. These control ones, these were discs that were not pre-fired and then added organic paint to them. Totally, almost completely burned off on just a plain paint. This is smectite paint. I'm a little surprised it turned out brown instead of black. I'm not sure why that is. But this is probably the best indication of a glaze. This was a lead paint that had some other minerals added to it. These are some other tiles where I just wrote 850, and you can see there's glaze to that as well. So it has lead paint and or lead ore, copper carbonate, manganese, and some clay to get it all to stick and everything. So that's what the research in the journals would say, is that this paint had a high component of lead. Good experiment, more to be done, but always useful to do these kinds of experiments. If you're going to do primitive pottery, you have to be willing to experiment, and these are the kinds of things that I think are helpful. Thanks for joining me, really appreciate it. If you like this video, find it helpful, kind of interesting, kind of entertaining, thumbs up, subscriptions, and always love those comments. So until next time, this is Wes, wishing you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.